Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and I think it's true that we are all slaves to our essential programming. Why else would I have eaten this entire sleeve of Oreos? It's my nature. I'm joined on this episode by Kelli Fitzpatrick. Kelli is an author, a teacher, and a community activist who is a winner of the 2016 Strange New Worlds competition. She also writes flash fiction, and her essays on genre entertainment have been featured in various anthologies and on womenatwarp.com. Kelli, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Permission to come aboard granted.
Excellent.
Today we'll be talking about Scorpion and Scorpion Part 2, the last episode of the third season and the first episode of the fourth season of Star Trek Voyager, respectively. Being the captain of a Federation starship isn't all drinking tea, listening to string quartets, and romancing sexy green aliens. Every Starfleet vessel is itself a piece of the Federation, a roving embassy that may be called on to act in the interest of the peoples of the United Federation of Planets, whether that act is diplomatic, economic, or defensive. General orders like the Prime Directive can guide a commander's decisions, but the galaxy is too vast for any rule set to cover every eventuality, and sometimes a captain may be forced to consider a deal with the devil. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. I wanted to ask you, Kelli, if you've been watching the short treks on CBS All Access.
I have, yes.
I wanted to point out that after our discussion last year about schools in Trek, we finally see a classroom in Children of Mars.
Yes. Oh, what an episode.
which is very traditional for the most future classroom, I believe, that we've ever seen. I guess I didn't look too close, but I feel like they almost had those uppercase A, lowercase a, uppercase B, lowercase b, a thing that goes around the ceiling of the classroom.
Yep. The border, like that's in every primary classroom.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember it looking very familiar, and I remember us speaking about that we kind of were hoping that maybe the education system as a whole would advance once we get into, the 21st century. But
right. But it seems like they've got, they've got holograms, but it's still reading and writing and arithmetic, it looks like.
Yes. Well, as a writer, I'm thrilled to know that writing is going to survive as a pastime and as a method of communication.
Yeah.
But what a beautiful episode.
Yeah, it was beautiful, but it was very short. It was like a tone poem almost. And I wonder why did they, what was the impact they were looking for? Why did they decide to do it and set it there specifically?
The way I took it was that it was a setup for, the events of Picard. Yeah. And it did not end the way I expected, obviously. Yeah, I won't spoil it if your listeners haven't seen it. But I loved that it got into the relationship aspect of Trek, that we have these moments where even in the far future, we still have humans, not liking each other, and these two little kids can't get along, for what really is a silly reason. But then something larger kind of pulls the focus back onto bigger issues. And I think that's a really good metaphor for a lot of things that happen in Trek.
Yeah, and it's for anybody who's old enough, it's a familiar sort of scenario, drawing off of tragedies like 9/11. But
yes.
I think it's interesting that we see a repetition of. I wouldn't expect people to forget, of course, never forget. But we've got somebody who won like 1 million Grammys the other night who was born after 9/11. There's a whole generation now of people, who that is a historical event, and so for them to frame it specifically in a scenario that I think, a lot of people who are adults today found themselves in, watching a TV, in their classroom, alphabet border or not. I think that would resonate a lot with those people.
Very much so. I mean, those of us who are old enough to remember it, all remember exactly where we were on 9/11, and I happened to be in a classroom at the time. But it was interesting. I started teaching 8 years ago now, and my very first year in the classroom, my students who were juniors and seniors were just barely old enough to have remembered that event in U.S. history. So it's crazy how quickly history turns over.
Well, we were already kind of talking about Picard. So did you see the premiere of Star Trek Picard?
Yes.
Well, let's transition into that, too. And I hope our listeners have seen it, or they're just going to have to fast forward through all of this. But All that leads into, of course, what happens in Picard, and we've only, of course, seen one episode so far, which I think I read that the producers consider like the first 2 or the first 3 episodes to really be like the pilot, like you would get Farpoint, you know, like an hour or 2 hour long pilot. And so, yeah, I think myself and a lot of other viewers felt a little bit cheated when we see the Borg cube and then the credits come up. But I'm sure that tragedy will, it's already been mentioned, but I'm sure that it'll factor heavily into, you know, what we see coming up in the show.
Yeah, that really does feel like it's going to be a defining event, and it just is a landscape altering event within, you know, the human solar system, but then also obviously in the life of Captain Picard.
Yeah, and you get the idea that we see, you know, day to day or week to week, our heroes on the Enterprise or the station or wherever dealing with these, you know, these crazy anomalies or like wars or horrible events. But there's a homeostasis in the society where it continues, and we've not seen, I don't think, since, you know, the start of the Federation back in the time of Enterprise, something that's really rocked the Federation to its core outside of maybe the Dominion War, which even itself only reached Earth like on one occasion. So,
right.
You know, Star Trek's always been concerned not with the future, the 24th century, but with the century in which it's airing.
Yes.
And Trek's always reflected the modern distrust of governments and institutions, I think, in that whenever we see the leadership of Starfleet or the Federation, it's always at odds with the noble aspirations of what our show's main characters are doing. And in the world of Picard, as we've seen it after one episode, it seems to be taking a hard turn into those ideas with Starfleet, you know, abandoning the Romulan rescue and banning synthetic research. And we've got Fox News grilling Picard in his living room.
Yes.
I have to wonder, like, are we setting up a world in the 25th century where the Badmirals finally won?
You know, it really feels like that. Although I think you're automatically setting yourself up as a bad guy if you position yourself on the opposite end from Picard. But
yeah, right.
You know, it really was distressing, you know, for me to think about a Starfleet that would turn its back on a humanitarian endeavor that is as extensive as, you know, the Romulan refugee crisis, and for that to be extensive enough for Picard to leave. I'm really interested in personhood rights specifically, and so I've always been fascinated by any Star Trek episodes that talk about the life, the life and sentient rights of, you know, artificial life forms.
Yeah.
In the universe, and so to hear that it looks like that the universe kind of went backwards as far as
it certainly
rights
does.
for those beings here. That was very distressing to kind of see them in that lab and see them looking backwards. You know, sometimes history does kind of go backwards.
It's something that comes up a lot on this show. Just the question of why they never felt it was really necessary in Star Trek up to this point to really explore like the rights of AI, artificial life. Of course, you know, we've got The Measure of a Man, and that's like about it. And I think we kind of theorized that Gene Roddenberry is really interested in telling stories about people and about humanity. And so why would we bother telling stories about robots? But of course, we're dealing with that in the 21st century right now. And I think it's really telling that they want to make this show now take a hard turn into, hey, you want robots and AI, let's do it. And their touchstone is The Measure of a Man.
Yes, absolutely. I think TNG leaned into that really hard with developing the Data character. You know, I don't think anybody can argue that he's not a person. You know, and another episode that I really love that gets at this, or at least approaches it, is Author in Voyager, because when the EMH decides he wants to author his own content, then suddenly it becomes an issue of, well, can an artificial life form have intellectual property rights?
Yeah, but it's almost more of like a legal drama, though, because and we'll talk about this and the way that they end up having to tell stories in Voyager later in this episode. But since they're stuck in the Delta Quadrant, they have to save that little bit for the end where we see all the working on the railroad doctors like working in the mine or whatever. But the rest of the episode is just like, well, does he have publishing rights for this?
Yeah. Right. And so I think you're right that they never really faced it head on. And so to see that really come to the forefront in this premiere, it excites me a lot.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating, I think. Going along those lines of like what's going on in the future, I've seen a lot of people or I've read a lot of comments online, people being critical of the show in its depiction of like this not so perfect future, which first of all, just everyone online shut up about everything forever. But also Trek has always wanted to explore our current political climate. And it's always tried to do that by putting the problems of society in the societies that the Federation comes in contact with.
Yes.
But maybe it's time to turn it around. I mean, let's face it, like, maybe we should be doing that introspection and that looking in. Discovery is also doing something. Well, nobody knows, but they've taken the ship to the far future where it looks like maybe the Federation has gone away or has changed greatly. But the world of the 25th century in Picard doesn't look that bad. I mean, did you see future Boston? It looks great.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
The architecture and like a lot of great stuff going on there.
Yeah, and Picard's got a pit bull, and nobody seems to have a problem with that in the show.
Yeah.
So
it's so cute, and vineyards still exist
for some reason. Yeah,
and yeah.
But we do see. I always wondered, with the economy of the Federation, like who picks the grapes, and now we see that no, we've got automated watering things, and so yeah. Well, we're finally. I've been asking these questions for 5 years on this show, and we're finally getting our answers. So I'm happy about that. Well, we do a live show every Thursday night where we talk about that week's episode of Star Trek Picard or Discovery. So if listeners are interested, they can find out more about our show, Discoverage, at EISDpod on Twitter or by going to enterprisingindividuals.com. The last time that you were on the show, we talked about the state of education in the Star Trek universe, and we also talked about the after-school writing group that you founded for teens in your community. And I'm curious, I don't remember exactly if we talked about this specifically, but what kinds of writing do you see young people gravitating to? Do you have any budding sci-fi authors in your charge?
Very many of them,
Really?
Yes. So my writing group is pretty varied. There's a variety of different types of writing going on. So I have a young woman who is writing a horror novel. I have several young people who are writing manga. So they're like drawing their own comics and illustrating them, and they're really gorgeous.
Sure.
Like they're really great. I have a couple guys who write D&D campaigns while they're there.
Oh, okay.
I have one girl who is writing a sci-fi story. I've got another person who does like online game writing. One person writes DC fan fiction stuff, you know.
Wow.
So it's just kind of all over the place. But they know me, and they know, that my heart lives in sci-fi, and so it's fun when they kind of gravitate that direction. But yeah,
that's really great. I feel like a proud parent, even though I'm not a parent, because that's all the stuff that I was doing when I was their age. And if I had joined a writing group like the one that you started, I imagine that we would be writing, I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree or something like that. But the fact that they get to express themselves in all these ways that are so valid and are getting validation now is really great.
Yeah, it's my favorite part of my week, and I have gotten feedback from them that it's very valuable for them. So I'm very lucky to get to help them with that.
Well, that's really great. We talked last time as well about your work writing for Modiphius on their Star Trek Adventures RPG. And I know that you can't be totally forthcoming on what you're working on specifically, but can you tell us if anything that you've written has been included in any of the most recent releases, like the Gamma Quadrant source book?
My stuff is not in that book. It will be in an upcoming book from Modiphius that should be out this year.
Okay.
And then I'm working on some additional content for a future project down the line. They have so many projects in the air, like you have no idea.
Yeah. I was looking at their online store today, and I was like, wow, when did that come out? No, they got this, they got this.
Oh, they are juggernauts of content. And I mean, Jim Johnson does an amazing job as an editor, like coordinating everything. So it's a great company to work for.
Well, I'm still trying to get a group together to run a Star Trek Adventures game. So anyone within the sound of my voice, contact me on Twitter or at eistpod@gmail.com. We can play online. It's not a problem. Well, why'd you choose this specific episode or these episodes, Scorpion and Scorpion Part 2, to discuss today?
Well, Voyager is my favorite iteration of Trek.
Sure.
It was the first one that I sort of grew up watching, and I just love Captain Janeway as a character, but she's kind of also like a role model. And I really love these episodes because we get to see her kind of really pushed to the edge where she has to make some decisions that I think are kind of on the fringe of Federation ethics.
Yeah.
Like, in previous series in Next Gen, the Borg are kind of the ultimate nemesis. They assimilated Captain Picard. They're evil, right?
Right.
And in this episode, we get to see her make a choice to actually ally with the Borg because there's a greater threat,
Yeah.
that faces both of them in species 8472. So I love that kind of ethical decision that they have to make. And obviously Commander Chakotay disagrees. And so we get to see that great tension and friction between those two as they go back and forth on the process of working out how do we make the correct diplomatic decision that is both best for our crew and our safety, but also, ethically sound.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm not sure that I totally like cuddly Janeway and Chakotay or Janekotway or whatever their couple name is, and I get uncomfortable when I think about them clashing as well.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, you couldn't do either one of those for 7 years, but
No.
I feel like we were just getting to the point where, because there are some episodes before this where they are weirdly intimate, like with each other.
Yeah.
And then they want to make that they really draw a line here that's supposed to set up this sort of slow boiling division between them that will boil over in I can't remember the name of the episode, but there's a season 6 episode, where he almost mutinies, and I feel like if I looked back, it would be hard to sort of track exactly how their relationship develops. But I'm sure it's a continually developing one, and it's much more than we ever got with number one, who would just do whatever Picard said.
Yeah, it's complex, and I think part of that was because Chakotay never signed up to be on Voyager in the Delta Quadrant. He just was a Maquis who got stranded there, and so they had to just kind of make it work. And so I think it's pretty impressive that they were able to work together as well as they were, all things considered.
Yeah.
But I love the way that the duality of them kind of, fighting against each other. He wants to stay and be safe, and she wants to push forward. It mirrors the different fighting ideologies that are in the larger episode altogether of, if we fight each other, we all lose kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Voyager comes at a time in Trek where they've already successfully revived Trek as a property with TNG, and then they took the difficult steps of doing something different with it and succeeding with DS9. And then Voyager comes, and there's a lot of pressure on it. It's the flagship show of their new network, UPN. It's got the first female captain, and its mandate is kind of to bring Trek back to exploring space. And yet it's got this intense premise where the ship is stranded far from home. And it's also being somewhat overshadowed, I think, by the TNG films. Like they haven't really given it up just yet. We're still getting the adventures of Picard's crew that we want to see on the big screen. And so you've got a show that, under writers like Braga and Taylor and Manosky and Fuller, it's really trying to push the envelope of Trek storytelling. But there's also pressure to make it friendly to new viewers. And the show also seems to get, just existing so late in the franchise as it does, it gets all these hand-me-down elements, like the Borg, or like I've been doing a rewatch, and I'm in the middle of I just got through the middle of season 3, and it's like, here's another TNG plot, TNG plot, TNG plot, like a lot of recycled storylines, or just literally adding TNG characters to the show in later seasons. And yet, when it's at its best, I think Voyager really achieves some unique storytelling that edgy has become a word that, is not positive anymore, but is really, I guess, on the edge of what you would generally see on Trek. And then you've got a character like Seven of Nine who could have just been a Borg and another emotionless character like Spock or Tuvok or just eye candy on the show. But I think the show really stands out in moments like these episodes, Scorpion and Scorpion Part 2, even when revisiting already used story elements.
Absolutely. I really agree that Voyager has, it has the cliche like, oh, another transporter accident,
Another
it
shuttle
has
crash. Yeah.
another shuttlecraft is, crashes on an unknown planet. But the moments when you have these characters dealing with these nuanced things that come out of being stranded 70 years from home, I think that's a place that you don't get to anywhere else in Trek, where it really is you're out here completely by yourself. Since I watched Voyager first, there was always that looming thing of like, we might not make it out here, we
Sure.
might not get home, we might all die in the process. And there really was nobody around them other than the allies that they forged when they were out there. And then I went and started watching other, Trek shows, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's like a star base, like,
This guy's got it made.
for all these people, and they still got problems. So it seemed like almost too easy. But obviously then there's bigger conflicts and things that happen. But I really love the kind of scrappiness that they have to go through, and they have to lean on each other. It really is the crew that I think feels the most like a family.
Yeah.
And that's one of the plot lines that comes in with 7 of 9. I think we really get to see them decide consciously. Janeway says at the end of this episode, like, we're responsible for whatever happens to her now because we pulled the plug. So she's one of us now. And they start out with the word friend, but I really think it does end up being, she's part of their family, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Enterprise's biggest problem was, oh no, look, Sana Troy's coming back. Everybody hide.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, seriously.
Well, we are talking the Voyager episodes Scorpion and Scorpion Part 2. Scorpion first aired on May 21st, 1997, and Part 2 aired on September 3rd, 1997. So, of course, that summer break there. The first part was written by Brandon Braga and Joe Menosky, as was the second part, written by them. The first episode was directed by David Livingston. The second was directed by Vinrit Colby. We've talked about Livingston and Colby, who are both veteran Trek directors, on the show before. And, of course, we've talked about Brandon Braga. But I don't think we've said much about Joe Menosky. Joe Menosky got his start with Trek as an executive story editor during TNG's 4th season, and he went on to be a co-producer on TNG, as well as an executive producer on Voyager, and he was a co-executive producer on Discovery the first season as well. And he's written or co-written 57 scripts between his work on TNG, DS9, and Voyager, and he also wrote a episode of Discovery as well. He wrote 36 scripts for Voyager, so it's a lot. And he began his career as a journalist and a science reporter for NPR. And he's currently a co-producer and writer on The Orville. And he graduated from Pomona College in California, where apparently the number 47 has a special significance. So he's the one responsible for inserting the number 47 into many of his scripts, a practice that has spread to other writers' scripts in the Star Trek franchise. And I'm racking my brain. I can't think of anything, but I'm sure it's already made its way into Discovery.
Yeah, it's not ringing a bell, but that's really hilarious.
Yeah. The stardate for the first episode is 50984.3, and the stardate for the second episode is 51003.7. And this is a two-parter, so a little extra latitude. Your assignment, Kelly, if you can, is to give us a 50-word synopsis of Scorpion and Scorpion Part 2.
Oh, let's see. All right. As Voyager approaches Borg-occupied space, the crew attempts to devise a plan for traversing the space safely, and to do so, they must ally with the Borg to fight species 8472, a formidable enemy that threatens both of them, but alliances go awry, and Voyager ends up with a new crew member.
That's right. And pretty soon one less, too.
Oh, yeah.
Got to balance it out a little. But yeah, that's later. Here are some interesting facts from the memory banks about this episode. The episode title, of course, comes from the, I believe, Aesop fable about the scorpion and the frog, a fox in Chakotay's retelling. And I had never heard this fable growing up. It makes a lot of sense, and I think it works well both with Oreos and this episode. But I had been exposed to it for the first time seeing the movie The Crying Game, the Neil Jordan movie. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but it plays an important part in sort of character in that film. This episode and a lot of the major developments of Voyager Season 4 And on to season 7, where the result of big ideas by Brandon Braga and the writing staff. The Year of Hell 2-parter, which would appear later in the show's 4th season, was the original pick to end the show's 3rd season and start its 4th. However, the impending cast changes that were coming up in the show led to them pushing that story idea back. I don't know if you remember, I think it's the episode where Kes is moving back through time, but they actually set up the Krenim and the Year of Hell before we even reach it, and later in the 4th season.
Yes.
Which I totally forgot about that when I was rewatching it recently. I'm like, what are they talking about? They haven't run into Kurtwood Smith yet. Well, but it's time travel, so I guess it doesn't matter. And of course, it's a total paradox because she's not even on the ship anymore, so it doesn't make any sense. After delaying Year of Hell, Braga and Manowski began working on another story idea involving doppelgangers of the Voyager crew, beating them home to Earth. But that idea was eventually scrapped, and the doppelganger idea was recycled for the later Silver Blood episodes. Having the Borg appear in Voyager seems like a no-brainer since they originate from the Delta Quadrant, but apparently the writers of Voyager didn't have any major plans for the Borg outside of seeing the liberated Borg in the 3rd season episode Unity. The Borg featured heavily, of course, in the motion picture First Contact, which came out a year before this episode premiered, and Braga felt that the time would be right to see the Borg become a threat in Voyager. In fact, the Borg costumes in this episode were recycled from First Contact, as well as set pieces like the Borg corridors and the alcoves, and actually the background in the Borg cube bridge shot is recycled from the film as well. In writing the script, Braga included an idea that had been considered for Unity but scrapped, the image of a graveyard of Borg cubes. In fact, the large-scale set pieces in the episode, like the Borg graveyard, the fleet of cubes fleeing the bioships, and of course the summary destruction of the Borg cubes that opened the episode, were all part of a concerted effort by the writing staff to up the wow factor in the show's 4th season. And speaking of the teaser of the first episode where the Borg cubes are destroyed, it clocks in as the second shortest teaser in the franchise at just under 20 seconds. The franchise's shortest teaser is from the Enterprise episode Impulse, which features a deranged T'Pol coming into sickbay and being restrained, and it's just over 18 seconds. And I feel like the teaser is a lost art in television. I feel like... I guess I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't know what they're doing on NCIS, but as far as sci-fi TV goes, the way that shows become so serial now and so like episode to episode, I feel like giving you that little, oh my God, it's 15 Borg cubes. Brr. You don't see that so much anymore.
Right, especially since I think the media is shifting to streaming.
Yeah.
Like Netflix has a little button where you can, skip the intro and there's no commercials. And so like there isn't necessarily that wait time where you have to sit with whatever they dumped on you in the teaser. But I really agree. I think it's an art of what do you give them as a tiny little nugget in the beginning to foreshadow and hint at the conflict that's coming in the episode without giving too much away.
Yeah, I like that. A lot of streaming shows, like even Discovery, will just roll into the story, and then like 10 minutes in, what would have been the first act break, in an old style Trek show is like, oh yeah, play the theme. And I'll show all 37 producers, and then we'll get back to the show.
I didn't time it, but I feel like the Picard opening scene or opening credits was very far into the episode, so much so that it kind of surprised me. I'm like, oh wait, this is the intro, like. But it was a beautiful intro, so it was worth waiting for. Yeah,
plus they want to do that thing where it opens with a dream sequence. Again, we're spoiling things, I guess, but it's just the opening. It opens with a dream sequence, which is, of course, coming in from the end of TNG with the poker game. And then you can't leave us with that, so you got to show him waking up, and then we got to meet his dog and his housekeeper. And so, now we're 8 minutes in. Yeah. This episode is the 3rd Trek finale where the Borg appear, having previously been in The Best of Both Worlds, the 3rd season TNG, and Descent, the 6th season finale of TNG. This is the first episode in which Borg nanoprobes are mentioned, although Borg nanotechnology was referenced in The Best of Both Worlds Part 2. This is Jennifer Lean's last episode as a regular cast member. She is billed as also starring Jennifer Lean in Scorpion Part 2. And there were rumors that both Kes and Harry Kim's characters were up for the chopping block come the 4th season and the addition of 7 of 9. And, the fact that Harry was near death at the end end of the first episode seemed to suggest which way that was going to go. However, it was Jennifer Lean's cast that ended up leaving the show. And I don't know, it may or may not have something to do with it, but Garrett Wang was featured as one of People magazine's 50 sexiest people that year, so you can draw your own conclusions, I guess.
Nice.
Also from Scorpion Part 1 onward, the main characters no longer have ranks in the opening credits. Only Captain Janeway does.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't noticed that before.
Yeah, it's, the old, starring DeForest Kelly as Dr. McCoy or whatever. Yeah, they've taken that out. Incidentally, this is Kate Mulgrew's favorite episode of Voyager. She
really?
Said
Scorpion is?
On one occasion, she said that, yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Let's talk about the guest stars in the episodes. Of course, Jonathan Rhys Davies appears in the role of Leonardo da Vinci. The Welsh Rhys Davies has had a long career in film and TV, very recognizable. He's played Gimli and Treebeard in Lord of the Rings, Sala in the Indiana Jones films, and Professor Maximilian Arturo in Sliders, which I'm old enough to remember. I don't know about any other listeners, but Sliders got me through college. He was offered the role by the producers with no audition, and he's a lifelong Star Trek fan, so that suited him just fine. The character Da Vinci was added to the story at Kate Mulgrew's request, as the writers were looking for a character that Janeway could confide in and bounce ideas off of. He would appear again in the 4th season episode Concerning Flight, and his workshop would be seen several more times in the 4th season. Janeway says at one point that, quote, "Someone once said, all invention is but an extension of the body of man," end quote. That's a quote from Marshall McLuhan, a philosopher in media theory. He's also known for the expression, "the medium is the message." No idea what he thought about Star Trek, although I would have loved to get his opinion on holodecks.
I'm really glad they went with Leonardo as the character. I feel like that character's interplay with Janeway is excellent.
Yes.
And it really embodies her spirit of exploration. And,
yes.
I love seeing her go in there and just I want to get my hands in clay.
Yeah, I know. Stick a nose on there. Yeah. And I love to, she's of course was a science officer before, and she's, an accomplished scientist, but I love the fact that she embodies, for me, the sort of dilettante hero, like a Victorian literature, like somebody who, like you said, it wants to explore, wants to know everything, isn't necessarily an expert at everything, but is always kind of searching for more knowledge, which is a perfect person to be in Starfleet.
It really is, yes.
Species 8472 makes their debut in this episode in Scorpion. They were originally called Species 84729, but they dropped the 9. Or, of course, they're called the Undine, I believe, in Star Trek Online. And the producers of the show were inspired by the success of the previous episode Macrocosm, in which a lot of digital effects were used. This is the episode that's kind of like Alien, where Janeway's running around the ship, with a gun. Mm-hmm. And a tank top, trying to kill these giant viruses. Yeah. And so they needed to come up with something that could scare even the Borg. And Brandon Braga is credited with coming up with the idea. And of course, a lot of people helped. Dan Curry, who is a effects person on the show, really pushed the idea that they would be made entirely of CGI. Mm-hmm. They didn't want a guy in a costume. And he based his design on Triffids from Day of the Triffids, them having 3 legs. They also wanted to really push the idea that you would know that there couldn't be anybody in there. So they had, the articulated legs and the extra limb. And they have those weird, if you took the skin off of somebody's neck, but they had the tendons and stuff still.
Yes.
Yeah. And they have extra joints and stuff, yeah. Concept artist Steve Berg also influenced the design a lot. They were originally supposed to be 14 feet tall, but he brought that down to a more reasonable 9 or 10 feet. And CGI effects director Ron Thornton suggested that they have no mouth. He thought that if they had big teeth, like the Tyrannosaurus Rex teeth, they would look a little silly, but having no mouth made them look scarier, and also you could
ominous.
Yeah, you could imagine that, what are they thinking? They're very sinister.
Yeah.
And CGI animator John Tesco was tasked with bringing them to digital life. In fact, many of the VFX shots in the episode are CGI or totally composite shots, including the Borg corpse sculpture that the away team finds in the cube. I was getting flashes of is this Hannibal or something now?
Yes.
It's so weird. Yeah.
It's very bloody. For Voyager, there's not a lot of scenes like that. I remember, funny story. I was pretty little when this was airing the first time, and my mom was a huge Trek fan, but she would not let me watch these episodes because she thought Species 8472 would give me nightmares. I was like, Mom, like,
well, they might have.
I want to watch it, but they're pretty creepy looking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then once you hear Kes start interpreting their thoughts, then they become even more scary.
If only your mom had known that all those bodies were just Playmates Toys Borg action figures.
Oh my gosh.
That were shot. Yeah, the visual effects guy just took them home, glued them together, and shot it like in his house, and then just comped it into that scene. Last and definitely not least, Scorpion Part 2 introduces the character of 7 of 9, tertiary adjunct of Unimatrix 01, played by Jeri Ryan. Ryan would play 7 of 9 through the 7th season of Voyager, and she is reprising the role in the Picard series. Her first series regular role on television was the NBC sci-fi series Dark Skies. After Trek, she would become a series regular on the Fox series Boston Public and appear in the 2000 film Dracula 2000, and she would go on to a host of TV roles and guest appearances to this day. She knew nothing about Star Trek before taking on the role of 7. The producers gave her Star Trek First Contact to watch after she was cast, and she was told by the producers that her character would be different from the Borg Queen. Like, don't use the Borg Queen, Alice Krieg, as your base for your performance. So she just assumed that her performance would be silent, like the other Borg drones in the film. And when she got the dialogue, the script, she was surprised that she had a large share of the dialogue, and she was talking all the time in the episode. So she kind of freaked out, and she went to the producers and asked, like, Rick Berman, like, what they wanted her character to be like. And she was told that they were looking for 7 to be something of a hybrid between what you think of as the usual Borg and just a regular human character. And she was given a lot of latitude to develop that character and show 7's journey. Although I thought it was interesting that episode director Vinrick Colby told Ryan to think of 7 and the Borg as having the bearing of a Prussian general.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's such a... And he's German himself, so I mean, it makes sense. But like, it's such an image that you immediately go, oh, that's a great touchstone. Okay, yeah, I see what I'm doing here.
Yep, that makes sense.
The role of 7 was based in part on the Borg Queen, of course, and also on the character of Locutus, as embodied by Jean-Luc Picard. And I think it makes sense, the idea that the Borg would occasionally need like an interlocutor to like talk with certain species that they've decided not to assimilate, or for situations like this, where they're like, maybe we need to like get some help or something from these guys.
Yeah, I love that they kind of brought that idea back, but then, it ends up, it turns into a very different scenario for them to deal with than it was with Locutus.
Right. And of course, the costume, I mean, everybody knows her regular everyday costume, but the costume that she wears in these episodes was very arduous to put on. They had to make an entire body cast of her, which took like 6 hours, and glue all these things on, and then she had to wear a bald cap, and they glued things on that. And I'm just imagining being like a young actress who's done a couple sitcoms, and now you're coming in and they're just gluing things to your face, and it's like, okay. Andy Robinson tells a story about how he agreed to be Garak, and didn't know a lot about Star Trek. He was aware of it, but he's claustrophobic. So he sat down, and they started putting, the neck thing on him, and they putting the thing on his forehead, and he was like, nope, I can't do this. And he had to call his agent, and his agent's like, look, this could be really good for you. You got to do this. And so.
Oh, well, I'm glad he suffered through it, because, we now have Garak. But yeah, I cannot imagine. It would be hot, and it would be stiff, and it would be, very uncomfortable.
Jeri Ryan had that problem on the set of the Borg Cube as well, because she's wearing this entire like rubber suit like over her body. And then they're using smoke machines and stuff. And so she's starting to get like tired and kind of faint, but she thinks like, no, I'm the newbie here. I got to push through this. And she like fainted. And so now there's paramedics on the set, and she's like, oh crap. I didn't want to be that guy, but I just wanted to get it done.
Hazards of working in Star Trek.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about the episode itself. I have this theory. I don't think it's anything particularly brilliant, but all Trek shows seem to do a turnaround, as the 4th season starts. TNG, we all note that TNG started off pretty rough and started to improve as it went. And then we hit the best of both worlds, and that you're in for something different, and something special. And even DS9, which also had little bit steeper learning curve, but did get really good. Gets to the 4th season, and they almost like repilot the show. They have like this feature-length movie, basically, where they introduce Worf, they introduce the Klingons, and we even kind of take a break from the developing conflict of the Dominion. It hangs over everything, but we're going to take the show in a completely new direction. And that's really what happens here. Of course, I didn't talk about Enterprise. Hey, Enterprise, you know what? It works too. Enterprise season 4, they kind of wrap up. I'm trying to remember exactly where they were, but I know that season 4, they really dig into what the series kind of always should have been, which is let's see how the Federation comes together.
Yep,
you know what I mean?
It's the story of the Federation being formed.
Right. So one can only imagine what a 4th season of the original series would have looked like. Maybe they would have really hit their stride.
We can only imagine.
Yes. But anyway, and that's kind of where we're at. Like, this is Voyager's best of both worlds in a lot of ways.
It really is. Yeah. And I feel like once Seven comes into the cast, there's a lot of stuff that just kind of gels, and the storylines get really interesting and complex. I mean, I could say good things about a lot of different parts of Voyager, but I agree. I think this is definitely a turning point in the show.
And it's interesting, too, because I already liked the character of Janeway, and I liked the things that she had to deal with, this struggle of trying to keep her crew alive and yet trying to keep them all together. And I don't think that a female character has to have like a motherly like role necessarily, but once we introduce Seven, I really enjoy the stewardship that she has for that character. You know, it's like you mentioned before, she is a woman, but as a human, she, you know, it's like role-playing games. She's got like 10 levels of fighter and only 2 levels of bard, you know what I mean? Or human in this case. And so she really takes on this role of sort of mentoring her, you know, into her new humanity. And when you know that they hated each other on set, it makes it even more impressive that it just never comes out on screen. Like, they're both just like amazing actors, apparently.
Yeah, they have definite on-screen chemistry that really forefronts Janeway's, like you said, humanity and emotion and compassion and the nurturing aspects of her as a human being that she can't always rely on in certain situations of command. But we get to see it then with Seven, which I think is cool.
Yeah, we saw it previously a little bit with B'Elanna, but they kind of dropped that. You know, B'Elanna was somebody who didn't feel like she belonged, and of course she had these anger issues, and we see Janeway sort of support her into the role that she eventually takes. But now Seven kind of comes into that role.
Yeah, there's a few moments with Harry too where it felt kind of, you know, like, okay, it's gonna be okay, you know, like, but it definitely is more pronounced and more heartfelt, you know, with Seven.
Yeah. Having to do what Janeway does, get her people home and still maintain the values of the Federation, that's such an interesting like dichotomy for me. I think it could have gone much farther with it, because many times, you know, everything ends in a fairly pat way, as often Trek episodes do. You know, they're essentially violating the Prime Directive with every new system that they pull into. Like, they are out there on their own, and they're not coming from the Federation as an envoy. They're just like, hey, you don't know who we are, but here we are. If they were really following the letter of the law of the Prime Directive, they should probably just find an uninhabited planet, set up camp, set Voyager to self-destruct, and just live out their lives in the Delta Quadrant.
Yeah, and that's like pretty much Chakotay's main argument for like a long time. You know, he's like, seriously, let's just find a planet already, you know?
Yeah.
Although I don't know if that's really motivated by Prime Directive. I think it's more just he wants to settle down and stop racing around space. But yeah, we really do kind of get that idea that like, well, we're kind of out here by ourselves. Although she still definitely wants to preserve a lot of the principles of the Federation, at least morally speaking. What's the name of the episode where she runs into another Federation ship that got pulled by the caretaker, and they're definitely not acting morally because they're using those creatures to get home faster? I don't remember the name of the episode.
I don't either. It's Captain Ransom.
Yeah, but then we get the sort of the mirror image of here's what could have happened if they had just
Oh,
abandoned
yeah.
any principles and just did what was best for them and were very, sort of like consequentialist, self-motivated type.
And it's a completely inverted thing from, like, say, Captain Kirk, who I think has a lot of similarities with Janeway in the way that they kind of approach things. In that Captain Kirk is always like leaving the base to go put out the fire. Like, what's wrong with these colonists? What's this trade dispute? But Janeway and crew are complete strangers in here, so they can pull into an area and go, "Wow, we don't like what's going on here, but can we do anything to change it at all? Maybe we just have to fly away. Wow, we found a planet where to punish people, they, implant the memories of what they did, like when that thing where Tom Paris apparently killed a guy, right?
Yes.
And it's horrible and it's so violating, but they're like, well, just grab Tom and we got to go. There's nothing we can really do.
Right.
I love the idea too of, you mentioned Chakotay being like, do we have to do this? I like that character in Star Trek, and you don't see it a lot because it kind of like attacks the premise. But somebody like McCoy who's like,
yes,
I don't want to be out here. Like,
right.
Why are we out here in space all the time? Yeah, yeah.
Why do we got to do this? Yeah, I've really got the McCoy vibe from Chakotay in his best moments. Like I think that's what a first officer really should be. Like, should we really be doing this?
Yeah. Yeah, but when the show's at its best, like it's finding this synthesis of the principles of Starfleet, do good, but also we're going home. Like no matter what, we're going to see our loved ones again. I'm going to see my dog. Like I'm going to get these people home. They're relying on me.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very high bar for her to set because it seems almost impossible at the outset. Like realistically, they're not going to live to see it, and yet they just keep trying hard enough, and Q gets involved, and
right.
they eventually make it.
Yeah, we even get kind of a chance to maybe retire when they discover the Northwest Passage because they're like, yep. Oh, this is great. And then, oh no, there's like, it's full of ships and stuff. Yep. And Janeway's like, maybe we just find a planet. I guess maybe we quit. I don't want to quit, but I mean, maybe that's the right decision.
Right, because they've found this what seems to be like an option that's going to actually help them, and then not even that's going to work now. So I can see how it would be very, very daunting to just kind of keep going through all of this hostile territory, on and on and on. But
yeah.
They have a lot of awesome adventures on the way.
Yeah, well, yeah, they certainly do. I have a question. We see in the episode that the Borg have a planet, we see like a Borg world, kind of like we do see in First Contact, and it gets, blown up by, in that cool scene where we already know that these bioships are tough, but then they're like, Power Rangers form up, and then they like blow up the planet. Yeah. But my question is, what do the Borg even do with a planet? Like, they're on these ships. I've always thought that they take territory, but they don't have to hold it necessarily.
It seems like for the Borg to be successful, they just have to be omnipresent.
Just make you Borg.
Yes, they want to make every speck of existence Borg. And so it would make sense, sort of, that their philosophy of domination and conquest would extend to planets. I can almost picture them like dropping off a shipload of Borg drones and being like, okay, your mission is just to populate the planet.
Oh, they could.
So we can call it ours.
They could fire them off, like give them rockets and like shoot them off to planets.
Yes.
Just like one Borg and just like take over that planet.
Yes.
Yeah, like the coronavirus doesn't have to like move into my apartment. It just has to get me sick, and then I'll get other people sick. So
yes, and then they'll just Borgify the whole planet, and then then it's theirs, and then eventually the whole world is that. There was some themes similar to that in Discovery with other entities doing that, but
right.
It's a terrifying notion to think of something just kind of like taking over and homogenizing, and wiping out cultures and things like that. But,
and yeah, these episodes deal with the differences between having that homogenization and having individuality. I always wondered like what their goal is. I mean, obviously their goal is to expand, to add your individualness to our own or whatever. But it's like, is there some work that they're doing? Say that they took over the whole galaxy. Andromeda next? Like, what's their plan? And I know it's like the Joker, or it's like all these different things. Like, don't tell us the origin. It doesn't matter. Just let us enjoy the cool thing. But like somebody someday maybe could like write an origin of like how the Borg got to be this way. Like, why are they stuck in this mode?
Yeah, I think the moment in Voyager that really clicked to that for me, and it made me see the Borg a little different, is when they encounter the Omega particle, and Seven worships it like it's a deity because she's chasing perfection.
Yeah.
And so that made me go, oh, the Borg are a race of perfectionists that have, very they've applied it in a very unethical way, their search for perfection, but I can see where they would never be satisfied with the state of their existence. They think that adding more things and more things and more things onto themselves is somehow going to make them this unreachable level of perfect. And that's both scary, but also, I don't know, kind of sad a little bit to think about.
Definitely. If they're after, all we have to do is show them a picture of Baby Yoda if they're looking for perfection. And then they'll be like, oh, we did it.
Baby Yoda would break the collective.
That's when they wanted to put that picture in Hugh's head and kill them all. That's what it was, Baby Yoda.
They would just be like, no, sorry, we can't assimilate the cuteness.
Your cuteness cannot be assimilated. You'd think that if they understand efficiency, they must know that you can get too big. You know what I mean? Like it's like the Roman Empire. They were all about efficiency, but at some point it was like, oh, we got too big.
You would think so.
They haven't hit that point yet.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, they do seem to understand that they need like hubs, like Voyager encounters these little pockets of Borg, bases where they kind of understand that they have to keep some consolidation or density to their power. Yeah. But it seems like they don't they don't seem to worry that much about like the expendability of drones. They're kind of raw resources to them, which sounds really heartless to say, but if they do spread themselves too thin, like, it's not the end of the world. They're not viewing these as individual lives that are being lost, if they risk them unnecessarily.
What do you think about the idea of a Borg queen?
I love her as a character. I think she's an excellent villain. I think it makes sense that there has to be some sort of directing influence to manage an intelligence that is that vast, and that has that many moving pieces. There has to be an executive function of some kind, whether it's in a program or in a brain. You got to have something that's calling the shots. So it makes sense that would be there. And I like, for the most part, what they did with her character. There's some kind of weird scenes with her, but for the most part, I think she's a cool character.
Yeah, I guess that it would make... I mean, we were questioning what is this eternal thirst by the Borg for more resources and more assimilation. And if you think about it as... at the heart of it, there is, as portrayed in First Contact, this just evil person who just doesn't care and is just greedy. If she's sort of... that's the directive of the Borg, I guess I can understand.
It would be really interesting to know, like you said, is she part of the origination of the collective, or did she kind of arise out of it, as their chosen leader?
Yeah. But like Alex Kurtzman, don't listen to this. Don't give us the origin of the Borg story. Doesn't matter. We don't need that.
Right.
Something that's tough in writing Trek episodes is that it's not just like, the Roddenberry idea that there's no conflict in the future, but all the characters are so perfect and so well adjusted. There's nowhere to go with them.
DS9 shakes that up quite a bit.
Everybody's broken. Everybody has a problem already. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
At Voyager, I think it's a lot more subtle. Like, B'Elanna's sort of internal conflicts come out as we go.
Tom's an ex-con.
Tom's an ex-con, and doesn't really know how to care about other people at first, and Harry's insecure, but they are sort of, like you said, sort of subtle. They're still seemingly citizens who can function in a group. Even the Maquis, who were sort of, I guess, outlaws in the eyes of the Federation, are able to hop onto the starship and
Yeah.
assimilate relatively quickly. I know it wasn't all roses at first, but
Even Neelix is really nice. Like, he could have been a total jerk. And when they go into his backstory, he's like, well, I did this and I'm not proud of it. But it's like, yeah, but you're the guy that makes lunch for everybody. Like, everybody loves you.
Yeah, you're so sweet. We feel for him. And even, Tuvok, like you said, is maybe the more stoic character in this one, but they let him have moments of emotion and moral quandary and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's, they're people, but they maybe are part of this United Federation of Planets because they have certain ideals that make them able to function better together as individuals.
Yeah. I think that it's telling that all the TOS movies, and even some of the TNG ones, are about getting old and about your perceptions changing.
Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Rarely do we just jump in and go, it's another adventure. It's always like, oh yeah, it's not, I'm older now and I realize that some things aren't as important as I thought and other things are.
Yes, and their perspective of their career usually shifts, a little bit, or their understanding of the universe.
Speaking of people that are too nice, Kes is the too nicest, and maybe she had to go for that reason. Not to mention that she gets like Jean Grey powers and can fix every problem, but Kes is she just feels like this kind of unrealized potential, ironically, as her character is becoming like completely realized as a person. And so I kind of wonder where we could have gone if there was more for her, more grist for the mill, like going forward.
Yeah, I really was excited by her character in the pilot because she's kind of this revolutionary, who throws off the yoke of, oppressive thought or whatever from her society and decides, you know what, I'm just gonna like leave my home and go off with these strangers forever, which is pretty ballsy, but then I think, like you said, she kind of almost becomes more withdrawn and timid as we go on through the series, and I really wanted to see that sort of fire come out a little bit more. Obviously, it comes out literally, like you said, when she figures out her powers, but in a metaphorical way of her character development, that would have been interesting to see that mature.
Yes, but unrealized potential that it may be, we swap her for Seven of Nine, who I think becomes a much richer and more important character. And I love how, you mentioned it earlier, they talk about pulling the plug on her. And even in this moment where she was, the vanguard of this enemy that wants to totally destroy them and destroy their individuality, they're still debating her consent. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's laying in sick bay and they're like, we need to take this stuff out of her for her to keep living. And it's like, well, we don't have her consent to do that, both medically and just from a perspective of personhood. Like, we're the good guys, you know what I mean? Or at least it's good that they're thinking about that. And then you think about her character as somebody who, and I think consent's really important, but she's kind of mind controlled, isn't she? Like, she's a cult member. Like, could she even give her consent? We see in the next episode, The Gift, that she is literally fighting against, like, she's basically just saying, let me die. And they're like, well, there's no way we're just going to let you die. Mm-hmm. Okay, listen up, Alex Kurtzman, this time. Suicide is something that we talk about sometimes on this show, and like the right to make choices about your own life. And you'd think that like the Federation and Starfleet is this nurturing force that wants to everybody to have their best life. But, this is something that even Voyager has tackled in its own way with Death Wish, seeing the other Q wanting to die. I wonder if there's a future or a scenario in which Janeway and the Doctor just say, well, okay, that's what she wants, and then we just sort of let her slip away.
That is an issue that came up as I rewatched this episode because, it's nice to hear them consider consent, but it's hard for me, at least, to listen to Seven very clearly articulate her desires in this matter.
Yeah.
And them to kind of go against them. I mean, she's basically telling them that she would rather be dead than, revert back to humanity. And so then you get into this ethical dilemma of, like you said, does she have the capacity to make a decision that is in her own best interest? This is very similar to some of the ethical cases that my debate club is looking at right now.
Really?
As far as like, should children, for example, have the right to decide their own medical treatment? If a child has cancer, should they be able to say yes or no to chemotherapy? At what age are they allowed to make that call? So that's it. I mean, Seven isn't a child, but in a lot of ways, when she's first disconnected from the collective, she has a lot of those same sort of, like you said, difficulties becoming an individual.
Yeah. There's, deprogramming that has to go on with her, basically. Just coming out of the collective. Starfleet captains have to make a lot of tough choices, and Janeway has her share, but this almost feels to me, it doesn't get the same sort of fanfare, but like an anti-Tuvix decision. Janeway makes the decision that she does with Tuvix, which is basically, you're going to die. And with Seven, she makes the decision, you're going to live.
Yes. And it's interesting that both of them were moving them back toward individuality, and I don't know if that's her personal, like, moral constitution that led her that way, or if that's a reflection of the values of the Federation. But that's an interesting parallel.
Well, let's talk about individuality, or the lack thereof. In this episode, Janeway does the possibly unthinkable and makes a deal with her personal devil, the Borg. But isn't she in some way achieving what the Federation would want? Cooperation? If Jean-Luc Picard had rolled up to the Borg in Hide and Q, or whatever that episode was, and was like, hey, let's have a technological exchange. Let's be friends. And the Borg are like, sure. Then that would be great. Of course, that's not what happened.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, this looks like a major diplomatic win. I mean, this is getting, two people, or two entities that hate each other, to work together on a mutually beneficial project.
Yeah.
However, it becomes pretty obvious that the Borg are in this for personal gain and not for true diplomatic collaboration.
Yeah.
And obviously, they pull the rug and renege as soon as they get the chance to on the deal. Although they do feel, Seven does express that they felt like, Chakotay violated the terms of the agreement first.
That's true. She does say in later episodes, that she's not accustomed to deception or whatever. She sort of takes people, at their word, the Borg. But yeah, Chakotay did screw them over first.
Yes. So, can there be, lasting accord? I tend to want to think, at least, that there's always hope for peace between any two warring entities.
Sure.
If you can have reasoning and mutual respect prevail. So I'd like to think that, yes, there could be a truce somehow. But then when you look at the aims of the Borg, that are very much to, literally genocide every group of beings in existence, and then it's hard to figure out, okay, well, how does that coexist with anything else?
I'm sure that we're just basically, talking about what's going to happen in Picard. I mean, I'd have to imagine that 20, 30 years later, or whatever it is, we can't have the Borg just floating around out there, right? At some point, they stop their expansion, or some kind of truce is made. We see recovered Borg characters that are going to appear on the show, and so there's some kind of accord, or something is going to have to happen, or even like in the future of Discovery in the 32nd century or whatever, just seeing that the entire galaxy isn't Borg, they must be stopped somehow.
Right. Or contained.
Yeah.
Somehow. I'm really, this is just my personal hope, but I'm really holding out hope that Hugh is going to play a major role in that.
Yeah.
Because I loved him as a character in TNG. And I love the idea that the Borg could themselves decide to change their own society, but still be Borg.
Right.
I don't know. That's a fascinating concept.
In every revolution, there's one Borg.
Yes. Yes.
I like the Borg because they're like a haunted house in space, and with full of zombies, and we get a little bit of that on Voyager. We get Borgager a little bit.
Yes, we do. They Borgify one of the cargo bays,
Yeah.
so that Seven can work out of it, and that always makes me nervous. It's like, okay, Voyager has like its bioneural gel packs, and it's a very connected, almost living ship.
Yeah.
And so to see them like start plugging all of this Borg technology into it, it's like, oh no,
gets contaminated.
Yes, I'm always concerned about the ship. Don't hurt the ship.
Oh, it'll be fine. It's different parts of it are in different timelines, and there's two of it, and it's always fine. But those gel packs are always getting sick, though.
Yes.
There's a question, I think, or there's an irony in Seven's criticism of humanity, in that they're inefficient because they disagree with each other, and everybody gets to sound off and make their own opinion. And I don't know what book she's reading from, but isn't that how collectivism works? Like, doesn't everybody sort of get to contribute something in some way?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. Although I think there's the idea that you're contributing to the greater good.
Yeah.
So you're contributing to a common goal, so to speak. But I agree with that irony, because ultimately it's the idea of individualism that thwarts her attempts to take the ship.
Yeah.
So her prophecy turns out to not be true.
There's a hypocrisy too, I think, in what the Borg talks about, because they always talk about how it's going to be better for people after they assimilate them and that sort of thing. I guess maybe you have to understand you're being false to be a hypocrite, or I don't know, maybe not. But there's that value that Starfleet has in the actual opinion. The Borg, if some Borg got sick, the Borg would have no hesitation at all to just shoot them out of a cannon or whatever and just cut off something, and they would never try to save them. And so there's a difference there. And I like the fact that even Starfleet, when they find the Borg graveyard, they're like scanning for survivors. And I started to think, would they provide aid if there were survivors? Like, if there were hurt Borg, like, would they be obligated to help them? Would they even do that?
That's a tough one, because it seems like Janeway really wanted to help Seven, but that's only because they were responsible for what happened to her.
And the 9 other guys that Chakotay blew out the airlock.
Yeah,
each one of them could have been a Seven. Yeah,
right, correct. Yeah, it really does seem like the Borg are operating on a utilitarian philosophy of the end justifies the means, no matter what we have to do to get there, no matter how many drones, or anything else that's in the way, just mow it down. Whereas the Federation is more looking at it from a Kantian perspective of, you can't use people just to obtain your desired outcome. That's ethically wrong.
Oh boy, there's a trolley problem discussion coming up in this show's future, I think.
You definitely could have a trolley
utilitarianism. Somebody
problem.
dropped Kant on us. Here we go. Let's talk about Chakotay's decision, which he picks the other side of the track as far as the trolley problem goes, and is like, yeah, okay, Janeway, I'll do whatever I have to. Is she asleep? Blow him out the airlock. Let's do this. Like, he even like, I trust him. Like, I like him as a character. I think that he has the crew's best interest at heart, but he doesn't even think about it as much as Janeway does. He's just like, all right, cut it off.
Yeah, he really does seem to be in the camp of, let's protect our own, like, let's do what is best for us right now. And it's more of an us versus them kind of thing. And I think Janeway's looking at them as a valuable tool that shouldn't just be blown out the airlock.
Right. And also maybe as beings whose lives, tortured as they are, we should maybe respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how it's a little convenient that she gets a big bonk on the cabeza, and then 2 acts later she's fine again. But like, I like how she's like really mad when she comes back. And she probably doesn't have the right to be mad, just in terms of like the chain of command.
No.
She did give a standing order, but they didn't know if she was going to wake up. And so
Yeah,
he
I'm pretty sure he has the right to make the tactical call.
Sure, he played it the way that he thought it should go. And of course, we plant this kind of seed of distrust that'll be worked on a little bit as the show goes forward. Apparently, they were really trying to work this. And another thing that Rick Colby, the director, wanted to push was this idea of this tension between them, having a commander be disabled and then having the second do something else and just playing this sort of chain of command, this military structure against the kind of relationship and friendship and trust that they have between each other.
I like when Star Trek tackles character relationship issues because I think it really humanizes what can end up being character stereotypes otherwise. But it, like you said earlier, it's uncomfortable to see them against each other because they just seem to work so well together most of the time that it's like, no, stop yelling at each other.
Yeah.
You're on the same side here,
Yeah.
But they both do have good points, and so I think it's a realistic sort of a conflict that they set up in these episodes.
Yeah, and this is the disadvantage, of course, of individuality is that one person, the leader, can get knocked out and then somebody else makes a different decision.
Yes, as, every governmental system in the world knows,
Yes.
you change power and suddenly everything can change, and it's, yeah.
But of course they use it to their advantage again in a great way at the end of the episode where Janeway maybe tells a little lie and says that she's sent Chakotay to the brig.
Yep.
But as soon as Seven pulls her trap card, then it's Janeway's trap card, and we go for Scorpion.
Yes, I love that she used that as the code word, Janeway to Chakotay,
right.
Scorpion.
Yeah. I'm mad at you and you disobeyed me, but I still, I listen and I hear the things that my subordinates say, and I remember you told me about the Scorpion thing.
Yes, it's really genius.
We probably should get to wrap up here. We're running out of time, but Species 8472 is crazy. It's just a very non-Trek idea, and every alien they find is some guy with chewing gum on his face, But just having this crazy CGI alien, which we come to learn has 5 different sexes, and they're telepathic, and they're from a dimension that they call it fluidic space. But fluid is matter, so it's not even space. It's just fluid, basically.
Yes, it's just matter.
Yeah, yeah. They're just so, I don't know. A lot of people criticize some of the decisions that Brendan Braga made creatively, but I just think that that's just such a weird breath of weird fresh air in the Star Trek universe.
Well, I agree, and I think they had a tall order to find something that could out weird the Borg, and I think they did it here. They also stand out as different just because they really do seem bent on just pure destruction, the weak will perish or whatever they say. They don't seem to have any redeeming democratic qualities, at all. But they do have a very cool theme song, if you notice in the episode. Every time they show up, they've got this really cool little jingle that plays.
I wonder if you could just telepathy the Borg. Is there something about them having so many united minds or thinking so differently that would keep you from just, doing a mental whammy on them if they're such powerful telepaths or have such mental powers?
That would be interesting, mind melding with that many minds.
Or control the queen. Maybe you control the collective.
Oh wow, that would be the ultimate coup if they could do that.
It's probably in a tie-in novel somewhere.
Yes, I'm quite sure.
There's nothing new in the Star Trek extended universe.
Before.
Yeah. I think we probably talked about this when you were on the show to talk about education, but the holodeck, what a teaching tool. And if you could put some kid in Da Vinci's workshop.
Oh gosh.
What a substitute teacher.
That would be so amazing. I actually wrote an article about this for StarTrek.com and just tried to imagine how it would revolutionize reading.
Yeah.
Because, we spend a lot of time trying to get kids interested in reading, and what if I could just throw them into their book, for a chapter, and they could actually interact with the characters for a while? I think it would be really great. But, also talk about hands-on learning. It would be great. And then, of course, my teacher brain is suddenly like, okay, but what about, what if they get hurt, and how do you keep them from breaking the holodeck?
Sure, right.
So there's a lot of other considerations, but that is one piece of Trek technology that I do hope eventually gets invented.
Kids, meet Professor Moriarty.
Yeah, yes. Oh gosh, no. They will team up with him.
Yeah, I love. Oh my god, I love how all these. I guess like what you do in the holodeck is your business, but all these powerful characters like Captain Picard and Sisko and Janeway, they all want to go on the holodeck and do these kind of mundane things. Like Picard wants to be this gumshoe that people are always beating up and shooting, and Sisko just wants to play baseball, and Janeway wants to be a governess or something. Like she's always doing this.
I love that they all have their, like their personal fantasies that like they have places that they would actually rather be than on the Starship Enterprise, because like for us, like, okay, if you're going to take me somewhere, that's where I want to be, but for them, it's cool to get to look into their wishes and what they find interesting as entertainment narrative. And it's always different.
Yeah. And a distinct lack of responsibility too.
Yes. Kind of like, I just want to play this through and just, be able to not really think, which granted, like as a captain, they would be doing intensive decision making all day long. So I could see why they would want to escape.
Oh
that
yeah.
way.
It's just chilling out if they're just playing video games and just hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
Oh, definitely Janeway. I love her tenacity. I love her leadership style. I love that she's intensely passionate and compassionate and cares about all life. And this is a great episode that we're talking about here to exemplify that. She was a great role model for me when I was growing up. And I also just find it fun to watch her in her adventures. But I have an affinity for all of the captains in some way, shape, or form. But Janeway is definitely my captain.
I feel like you really get a sense of her as a person as well. I know that a detachment from Picard was part of the conception of the character early on. Like he was supposed to be this weird, kind of dried up guy that didn't like kids and, was kind of formal. And then later on, of course, we see, his inner life. But you get that right away with Janeway, and you already think of her as a person as well as a leader and a captain. And yeah, that's something that I really like about her.
Yeah, definitely.
Plus, I love coffee too. So.
I don't. I do not drink coffee, which everybody thinks I'm crazy for that, but I enjoy watching her enjoy her coffee.
Yeah.
So that works.
Well, don't ever start, kid. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, right?
Well, now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a promotion to the rank of ensign. What department on the ship do you work in?
I think I am going to work in communications.
Interesting.
Because I enjoy languages and I enjoy, communication and helping people understand each other.
So actual, the process of communications, not necessarily radio equipment or something like that.
Oh yeah, you're going to want somebody else to run the equipment. I will help mediate and negotiate and, help parse out some meaning for folks.
It's something that we don't see a lot, and I guess I wouldn't want Trek to change, but whatever planet they crash on in the Delta Quadrant, they immediately walk up to somebody, how's it going? Oh, pretty good. Like they can understand them thanks to the universal translator. And it's either, I understand that it's a lubrication to make the story go, but when you think about it from a linguistics perspective, it really makes language seem like, I guess it's not all that complicated. We've only got like 8,000 different languages or whatever on Earth, but apparently you can find the right program or app or something and it just takes care of that.
Most of the time, I mean, overwhelmingly that is true, and then we get Darmok, and suddenly the universal translator is like, wait, what? I don't understand the metaphors,
Yeah.
So it's cool to see the technology reach a breaking point there where it's just like, nah, sorry, I can't do this.
I just saw a episode of Voyager, I think in the 4th season, where Chakotay crash lands on a planet, and it's like a Vietnam metaphor. Like he runs into these guys who are in the woods with like M16s, and the way that they talk it reminds me of Firefly in that they use these kind of archaic terms for things. So they're like, when the lights come over the trunks or whatever, and it gets really annoying. And I don't like that episode very much, but I guess that's another example of the translator not quite getting what's going on.
Yes, and there's so many, questions about cultural context,
Yeah.
and how does the universal translator know enough about these alien races to contextualize what they're saying so that it comes through in a way that, the Starfleet folks can really truly comprehend what they mean. But Trek has a lot of episodes where they ask those questions, like in Ensigns of Command. Picard's trying to negotiate with the Shellyak, and like the translator's working, but like they're just not getting anywhere with the communications, and so they have this really cool little conversation with Troy about how do you actually access the meaning behind language. And I find episodes like that really fascinating.
It's the implicature subroutine in the Universal Translator. It just takes care of everything.
Yeah, like I mean that would be great if it could just like snap its fingers and make everybody understand each other perfectly.
If they really dug into it, would it make like lying impossible, or would it make being ironic impossible? Yeah.
That's very interesting. Or metaphor, or euphemism, or anything like that.
Or slang, profanity.
Wow. That's super interesting.
Well, too bad we're out of time.
Yeah, too bad. That's like a whole episode in itself.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you back for that one.
Awesome.
Ensign Fitzpatrick, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
You can find me at my website at kellyfitzpatrick.com and on Twitter at kellyfitzwrites.
Great. And thanks again for joining me.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
We're signing off till the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.
Your Honor, a courtroom is a crucible. In it we burn away irrelevancies until we are left with a pure product, the truth, for all time.
Oh man, this is so intense. Data's on trial for his life.
I know. This episode, The Measure of a Man, is based on the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision of 1857.
And every week on Backtracking, we take a look at the real-world events that inspired classic Star Trek episodes. Sorry.
Shut up!
Shh.
Who are you?
We're the hosts of Backtracking. I'm Caliban.
You will both be taken to the brig and from there to the nearest starbase, where you will answer charges for what you have done.
And I'm Gooey Fame.
This is not a game. This is life and death.
You can follow us on Twitter.
Backtracking is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
You go f*** yourself.